1, 2, 3, 4. Wow, this is so exciting. Wow, it's so exciting. Wow, it's so exciting.
Welcome to the Polar Bear Project, a podcast for the autism community. My name's Alan Doyle, and today we're meeting with Lisa Domican. Lisa is a mum, an advocate, a trainer, and co-creator of the Grace app. Lisa's based in County Wicklow, Ireland, with her husband Bill and their son Liam and daughter Grace. The Grace app is a digital picture exchange system for non-speaking autistic people. Lisa was winner of the Elevator programme with Social Entrepreneurs Ireland in 2011. She was Image Magazine's Social Entrepreneurs Businesswoman of the Year and TEDx speaker at Dublin Science Gallery in 2013. She's also written articles for the journal.ie. For the purposes and context of today's show, we recorded this conversation at the end of April in 2021, and we're talking about having to adapt to COVID and how they managed as a family. We discussed advocating for your children, accessing services, working with service providers, and of course, Lisa's Grace app journey. Lisa provides training with CATS, the Clinical Assessment Therapy and Training Services, who've generously given you, the listener, access to one of Lisa's autism training courses. So stay tuned at the end of the show for free access to the training. We hope you enjoy the conversation, and as always, take something of value from it. If so, please like and subscribe to the podcast on whatever format you listen to and wherever you get your podcasts. We hope you enjoy the show. So, Lisa, how are you? Good to see you.
Hi.
Well, look, who are we kidding? We've been chatting there for a little while there. It's great to see you again and catch up. I suppose let's just start with the whole craziness of COVID and how difficult it's been and how we've all had to adapt. How's it been for you guys?
Well, it was terrible to start with. It was awful. Yeah. And I've got, as you know, I've got two adults with autism with very high needs. Yeah. We have been in the adult services for a number of years and slowly moving and adapting and getting them used to us and us getting used to them. Mm-hmm. At first it was a relief because, as you know, when you're at school, when they're school age, it's I compare it to crossing a river. You can see both banks. You know who you're dealing with. You've got other people around you. It can be very challenging. You're dealing with education. You're dealing with health. One of them says one's responsible and no, I'm not. You're responsible. And sometimes social welfare as well. Mm-hmm. But you can see where you're trying to get to. And then when they become adults, it's like being on the shore of a vast ocean. Yeah. And everybody's a lot more spread out. You can't really see what the end goal is. And maybe 25 years ago, people knew my child was going into residential care and I'd probably see them once a month. Mm-hmm. But we've all kicked down the door and changed that and marched on the streets and said we want different outcomes for our loved ones. We want them to have autism specific. We want them to be in our homes. We want them to have active, meaningful lives. Mm-hmm. But we're all still navigating that system. The existing services, the Holy Orders led, are sort of having to adapt or else give up. Mm-hmm. The new services, what I call like the voluntary advocacy-led services, are sort of catching up, and they're both competing for funding streams. So you've got the funding's coming from health, and that's one clear thing, is the funding comes from health and that's it. Yeah. You're not dealing with unqualified teachers anymore or being gaslit by principals who tell you that the department sent this circular and this means that this teacher is qualified, and you know that they're not because they did maybe an hour of special needs education when they did their teaching degree and they have no experience. So all of that part is gone. Mm-hmm. But getting these services to understand that you don't want a babysitting service, that your child, and I know that as I am, and Adam Harris in particular, have done an awful lot for people with less challenging autism who have more ability, and he's been breaking down the door for them to be accepted in work and mainstream education.
And third level. Third level as well, yeah.
But there's our guys who will always have high needs and high support needs, but also are highly intelligent, highly challenging with that intelligence, and getting those services that exist to understand and adapt to that. And I mean, the service that my son went into, Geel, between the recession, they took their last cohort in 2012. And when it came time for my son to be assessed, I found out through Sapling's staff who had worked in Geel and said this is where Liam should go, that this would be the right place. But I also found out, on the other hand, that they hadn't taken anybody for 4 years because they'd had their funding cut off. So they'd taken in clients, and then the funding was cut, when everything was cut during the recession.
Yeah.
And that was another door-kicking exercise. I contacted every single Geel, and I did free Grace App training, and I delivered phones, and I did everything I could to be their best friend. And I got him in. But all of a sudden, instead of having old guys and literally 60, 70-year-olds in that day service that we got to, they had a cohort of young men. And in the 4 years that we were there, just before they moved during COVID, the staff changed. They had to be younger and fitter. The activities changed. Our guys need a minimum of 6 kilometres of hard exercise, if not intense aerobic exercise a day, or they're going to have behavioural issues. And then the sort of things that they wanted to do changed. But also, you have these annoying alpha mums who get out of the car after drop-off and come in, and you can see all the staff going like that when they see me get out of the car. It's like, oh, God, what now? I think that he should be doing this, and can we try this? And I want him to be doing this. And they've had to either pick that up and run with it, or I'm not sure about this. Now, I've been fortunate that they've run with it. And they've changed with us. And as I was saying to you earlier, with COVID, they had to adapt to a huge change very quickly. Now, I know that a lot of parents were left with nothing. I wasn't the only one who had the door closed on that Friday and not reopen for 5 months.
Correct.
But because I have two, and because my husband, like a lot of people, lost his job that weekend, basically. But 2 weeks later, he was back in work, working in transport logistics. So he was considered an essential worker and leaving the house at 6 a.m. And, I had 2 high-needs adults at home. So I'm contacting my services, or they were checking in. And I heard that one of the service providers was doing Zoom calls once a week. And I thought, what possible use? I was like, did you ever watch The Love Boat when you were younger? I was like Julie McCoy, cruise director. And I had to come up with activities for everybody on the Lido deck and this... And, like, what are we doing next? And what are we doing next? We've never done so many arts and crafts and walks, and the local golf club closed because everything closed. We took over. It became our local people's park because you needed safe places to walk. You couldn't go where everybody else was. No, exactly. I don't know if you noticed, but everybody was outside, and they were normal people, and we were, doing our arm length walk, trying to get around. So. I got not in-house, at the doorstep services. So they started sending someone out to take one or the other, or sometimes both. The first time it was both. Right. I think that was May. I had an hour to myself. And it was extraordinary. It was like Liam had gone off with his person for 3 hours. Gracie had been picked up and was going off for 2 hours. There was a crossover between the two. and I literally did not know what to do with myself. I'd been so busy running around for 5 months. And that adaptation and how the services caught up and provided a service, obviously I feel very, very loyal and grateful to them both for having adapted. But I think it also challenged them to become more adaptive.
No, absolutely. It's gonna, like, what do you think the landscape is going to change because of this? For sure. I mean, as you mentioned there as well about the commute and having to commute prior to this, and now the services are coming out to our doors. I mean, there's clearly that's something that we need to kind of keep or have as an option, or mix
absolutely
it with,
they were able to do it because I needed it. Now families with only one person or with both parents at home, it was probably different, The other part of it, yes, I was commuting, but there were local services in my area, which when I researched them prior to the guys leaving school, I refused. And I just said, this is the service I want.
Yeah.
And I did a lot of things to convince the service that my child was the right fit for them, and, you know, volunteered my time and training and everything else.
Yeah.
And negotiated with the disability managers to get what I wanted. But I was doing 120K a day. Wow. And still am. I still am. Now that both services are back open, I still am.
Right, yeah.
Because I found it easier to relax knowing that my guys were in the right place than I would had I walked them down the road to the local one. And the differences between the services, some of them are like a creche. Mm-hmm. They're watching DVDs.
Yeah.
And they're cutting pictures out of the Argos catalogue, and the people who are with them call themselves minders.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And then you've got services like where Liam is in a day service with a hub. So he goes to a venue every day.
Right.
He has his own desk. I got him a laptop at the start of COVID, and he does things like the NALA course and, you know, did the online DCU with support. He has one-to-one support. Now, Liam can't cross the road by himself.
Right.
Very smart guy,
yeah,
but has no sense of theory of mind or danger or people danger or car danger.
Right.
But in that same service, they started an outreach a couple of years ago, and they meet clients at a venue. So the client has to be able to travel independently on a bus.
Okay.
And do activities in the community. So that might be volunteering at the dog shelter to help out. They might be going to a university course for people with special needs. And that sort of outreach was something that they developed, which I think is really positive for the parents of those people, because they know that their child is having an engaged and meaningful day. Yeah. But at the same time, they're safe. Yeah. And the door opened and I was like, oh, hi, thanks for opening it. I'm busy. That adaptation is important.
Yeah, fantastic. Actually, do you know what I was just going to kind of hone in on, particularly for if there's sort of new, as the phrase goes, newly diagnosed parents or parents of a newly diagnosed child, that level of engagement and interaction that you've had with the services, Lisa, and I know you kind of half described it as an annoying alpha mum and all that, but really and truly, as you said, you were, I mean, if you just explain it a little bit more, or any advice that you'd have there for the parents like that, because as you said, you kind of paired up with them, to use the phrase. You gave them some stuff, you gave them training, and we got into that as well, because I want to hear about the Grace app and where it's at today, as well. But just on that engagement thing, and I think it's really, really important that we are all part of the same team, and it's more effective when everyone works together in the best interests of whether it's school. Yeah. Sorry,
and that's incredibly hard. Yeah, that is really hard outside of school.
Yeah.
And that's been, I noticed this, I started Grace 11 years ago.
Yeah.
And part of that was I did a little bit of media. I was on Jerry Ryan, and I got contacted by parents of adults. So I had a daughter who was 8 and a son who was 10 in the same school, and a very active parent community, which was very much, and the staff and everybody was on the same sheet in Saplings.
Yeah.
And these parents heard me on 2FM in the middle of the day, and it was the first time they'd kind of clicked in that there was something else.
Right.
Their guys were in res. Mm-hmm. They couldn't talk. Mm-hmm. What was this thing that you'd made? And I have to say, I found it quite heartbreaking that this was their first engagement and this was their first contact with someone else. One of them had sent me a newspaper clipping that another relative had cut out of the newspaper and posted to them with snail mail.
Wow, yeah.
And this is, I had an app on an iPhone, so trying to explain to them how their, Nokia 3310 was going to give them pictures to communicate with.
Yeah.
And I have to say, 11 years later, there is still a huge gap. An absolutely enormous gap in engagement and advocacy and self-driven advocacy based on being connected. Yeah. And what happens, and I've been very guilty of this, I've had 3 pretty serious bereavements in the last 6 years, and each time I dropped back a bit more from being a social advocate, of, being someone who people came to because I just didn't have the energy for them.
Yeah, yeah.
And have withdrawn. And then I find that, and the lifeboat analogy, I find like I'm balanced on that door beside the Titanic.
Right.
And if anybody comes up and starts kind of trying to climb onto it, I'm like, I'm sorry, but you're going to freeze to death. Yeah. I can only keep myself and my kids afloat.
Yeah, yeah.
And I see that's where those parents got to. They just got to the point where they didn't have any more energy to fight, and it's just fight, and the fight never stops.
Yeah.
And I think I said to you in my email, I said it is like the Hunger Games. It's like we're all being lined up to compete for that one apple that will be the service provision that we're entitled to.
Yes, yeah.
And if you have to connect with a lot of other people, a good friend gave me advice a long time ago. She said, you can't pull people along. If they want to come with you, let them, but you can't pull people because they'll pull you back.
Yeah.
And I think the last big event I went to was, remember the party in the Mansion House where we all got together to celebrate our kids having autism. Yeah. It was like we were all included.
Yes, yeah.
And I was sitting with a friend and it was just chilling because I couldn't bring my kids to such an event, or I would have been on duty.
Yeah.
And someone approached me and said, "Oh, that's Lisa," and then sat down to tell me all her problems.
Yeah.
And I was just an individual. I wasn't working for anybody. I was just a me.
Yeah.
So that becomes very difficult. And then parents separate. They're not connected online. They're not connected on the internet. Yeah. So your ability to advocate as a group becomes very weak. And that's where I call it the ocean. It's like we're all out there bobbing in the ocean and we're not helping each other along. And when I feel like I have the energy to do that, at the moment I'm working on, that's what that call was about. I'm working with 4 different agencies. I've got my day service for Grace, my day service for Liam. They're 2 different non-profit autism-specific agencies. They put me with a private home help company, so like Comfort Keepers, Caremark, those kind of helping old ladies get out of bed agencies. And they wanted me to take on a 4th agency for respite, which failed disastrously last Saturday. And I am talking to them about saying no. And I had a good conversation yesterday with a leader in the disability sector that we should have autism specific for everything. And we should have our agencies doing everything. So I'm negotiating for Liam's agency to take over the home help contract.
Right, yeah.
Same person.
Yep.
Absolutely the same thing.
Knows them, gets them, all that side of it. Yep.
But also knows autism, has a cohort of training resources, has a cohort of protocols of how you deal with someone with autism. It's not me constantly having to say, do this, do this, do this, do this, do this. Yeah. And for the respite piece to be provided within the day service piece. Yeah. So I'm talking to each agency and saying, well, you do this. If I can get the disability managers to listen to this, can you guys do this? And then try to bring them together.
Well,
and there's so much he said, she said that what I was doing earlier was, having had the conversation with the HSC person yesterday, was texting the other 2 and saying, this is what they're saying. I need to tell you what they're saying so that I can come back and say, well, that's not actually the case.
Yeah, no, exactly.
And I think they divide us.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think it's systemic as well, but in terms of that, everyone's, and it comes down to budget allocations and right back to exactly what you said about those lifeboats, when in certain circumstances, people are trying to defend their budgets and make sure and still make an impact. That's the thing to focus on, as you said. They want it to work, they want it to help and so on, but at the same time some constraints come along. But there was one thing you touched on there, Lisa, and I was kind of nearly jumping out of it, because the reason we're doing this project, the reason we're doing the podcast is exactly as you described it there. Likewise, thank God, not through any direct bereavements of late and things like that, but just mental health and other things. You kind of come and go and you get energy, and then other times you're able to do things and push things on. And then you just have to, as you say, kind of reel it all back in, and just kind of look after everyone around you and yourself, which is important. And I'm a fecker for forgetting that. But I mean, so it's fantastic to have you on and talk about this, because that's exactly what we're hoping to achieve here. That if everyone's out in the little boats bobbing around on the ocean, well, hopefully this will, and I'm actually, very positive about it, that it will connect us and we'll be able to throw different lifelines to each other and kind of make a big raft. It'll be Kevin Costner's water world before we can say.
No, I call it the Hunger Games crossed with Groundhog Day. Oh, yeah. We don't need a third metaphor.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, sorry, it's just too much water. So look, Lisa, it's been fantastic, and as usual, very so engaging and informative chatting with you. But I've got to So I suppose in terms of the Grace app, a picture exchange system, picture exchange communication systems, digital, which just kind of revolutionised the system, and it's used quite widely in lots of schools here in Ireland. And I'm not sure. I mean, you can kind of fill us in elsewhere as well. But I suppose if you just wanted to tell us a little bit about it. I remember I actually was doing a little bit of research on you, and you said how looking at the bus kind of prompted you or gave you the idea. You saw an image on the bus. You remember that?
I wasn't.
Tell us about it.
I wasn't connected to anyone in tech in 2008.
Yeah.
I was just a parent at Saplings like yourself, or you were. And we were all connected to the ABA community, and we all understood behaviour analysis. But prior to that, when my daughter had been in state special provision, in this case a preschool, as it is today, if a new parent was going into the same setting, there was no speech therapy, there was no occupational therapy, my daughter couldn't talk, and a teacher who had 6 pupils, 3 of whom couldn't talk, just said you have to do it yourself.
Right. So
I look up how to do it myself, and I go on a PECS course. So I found out what PECS was, Picture Exchange Communication System. A huge deal to get away from the family for 2 days to go and do this 2-day course. But I came back and I implemented it and set it up. And it means printing pictures and teaching the person to ask for them. And you do that by finding out what they like, which is our ABA background, and then showing them hand out of a hand. If you give me the picture of the chocolate, I will give you the chocolate. And it worked really, really well. And it had worked really well for my son, but he started talking within 3 months. Right. So 6 years later, she's still using this system. And I'm still saying there has to be a better way to do this than carrying around a huge folder of pictures, or having a small book and not having the right picture and having a massive tantrum because they can't find it, having to take photos, print the photo, laminate the photo, put the photo in the book, make sure the school's got it. So it just seemed ridiculous. And I went on course after course to try and get her to start talking, to say her words as she handed them over. And that was starting to work. So I'm really glad that in 2009, when I got things started, there was no other tech. The tech that you could get was 10 grand, and you had to go through a huge process to get it, to speak for a person with a disability, a speech disability or autism. When I saw the ad on the bus, it was for the iPod, the little pictures on the screen that reminded me of the PECS book. And then I used the connections that I had through being an advocate and doing the interwebs for Irish Autism to get close to the CEO of O2 at the time, Telefonica, and I asked her for a phone, and she got me a phone, which in 2009 was a pretty big deal because people were sleeping outside the phone shops.
What, they were the price of a car back then, I'd say, weren't
they? and in very short supply, and they just gave me one. They just said, get her one. So I was able to teach myself how to use it, teach my daughter how to use it, and she was so intuitive that I knew that I had something. But again, no tech connections.
Right.
Nothing to do with startups. And I just kept talking to everybody who I met. Literally, I'd be the lady holding out the phone as you came towards them. Found an article about a guy who was making a couple of grand a week on games that were apps. And I thought, what's an app? Facebook stalked him. And then arranged to meet him. He got his dad to give him a lift because he was only 19. So
Very good.
Here's me, this cougar sitting in Starbucks meeting this 19-year-old boy. And he got the concept, very visual guy, very high-tech guy, and was able to put it onto the phone. So we had a prototype, but it wasn't ever intended to be a business. It wasn't ever intended to be anything other than a way for Gracie to communicate. Excuse me. So that became the Grace app when my vision was moved forward by the good people in corporate responsibility at Telefonica. And then we put it onto the App Store in March 2010. And last year was meant to be our big 10th anniversary. I don't know if you remember what you were doing on the 11th of March 2020.
Yeah.
Watching the news?
Are you watching the news or queuing for toilet roll? One or the other.
Wine! With trolleys of wine.
Wine, yeah.
I was in Super Value when people were suddenly rushing to the... And so, forget about that. But as a business, a niche app for a niche community within a niche community is not a money spinner. I haven't made anything out of it since 2013.
Right, okay.
But that part of the story where I had to get people to come and babysit so I could take 2 days to do the course, that always stayed with me.
Yeah.
And I've developed that into a training module.
All right.
Which is available online in partnership with one of our early speech therapists who left the HSC because she didn't like sitting in meetings for 90% of her time. She actually wanted to do speech therapy.
Very good.
And her husband, they set up a private speech therapy company that you can go to, and we were using them for speech. But they felt that training needed to be accessible for parents and professionals, and they've put all these modules up on their site. Brilliant. And it was funny because they already had that going. We'd already filmed 2 of my courses that I do when COVID happened and all the teachers were at home, and they were able to then log in and do the training. But it's intended for the mum at 3 o'clock in the morning who's got everything done, is finally sitting down but can't get to sleep because her daughter can't talk. And they can Google it, log in, do it in 10 minutes, lock themselves in the toilet, do another 15 minutes. They can do it whenever it suits them. And then they can do it again and again, because that was the other part of the training. You come out and you're so full of the information that you don't take in all of it.
Exactly, yeah.
And you're able to access it yourself.
Yeah.
Because 20 years later, we still don't have speech therapists guiding our non-speaking kids, occupational therapists guiding our special needs assistants and teachers so that they know how to make it possible for someone to sit still and learn.
Yeah.
All those pieces are still missing, and they shouldn't be.
Yeah. And you're absolutely right. It's a Groundhog Day because, as you say, 20 years later, there are still parents and families, and trying to walk what seems like a well-trodden path, but for a lot of them, there's no how did this happen? They're still at sea, in terms of which way to go. Sorry, I'm mixing my metaphors, but that's essentially it. But I'll never forget, actually, I went to one of the trainings as well on the PECS training, and it wasn't that long after the diagnosis and all the other stuff where I'd stood in the kitchen where Killian's screaming, roaring, and I'm going on the, along the press at the different items, what is it that he wants, and all that. And I went into the loo and I just broke down in tears because I realised, oh my God, this is actually going to help him. This will really, really now. And similar to Liam, he went from strength to strength, and the words started to come then. Now not done by any means in a conversationally, but at least now if he needs something or wants something, he can ask for it. So
and that's great. That's fantastic.
Exactly.
But you're in, there's a fallow feeling. You're in the company of other people who are in the same situation as you. Yeah. Which if you've got other typically developing kids, I used to notice this with parents, because I don't have any typical kids, they'd have to mix with mainstream parents who have totally different expectations. And then you get into that first PECS course and you're with a cohort of parents who just know how hard it is. Yeah. And that fallow feeling. Yeah. But then for the first time, the person at the front of the room knows more than you. Yeah. And unfortunately, that doesn't happen when you first go into the special needs preschool or the special needs class.
Yeah.
Because of the way that the education is run in this country, there's no recognition of speciality and there's no recognition in terms of remuneration, training, actually complimenting and boosting teachers who use their own time, which a lot of them do.
And they have to, Lisa, that's the thing. I mean, I was about to say, look, it is getting better and it is improving. Of course it is, and it's a disservice to say to all those teachers and special needs assistants and so on that on their own time put
absolutely
so much
and
in.
I always say I meet the best of them because they've found me.
We do.
Because they've literally sat down and Googled Grace App. And contacted me and said, can you come in and train us? And that's where the training started. I mean, I was a career trainer at McDonald's when I was at school. I was a staff trainer when I was selling dresses. And being able to communicate what I've learned to other people, I find that extremely rewarding. But you also learn a lot coming back. Yeah. And so I really enjoyed that. Obviously, that all came to a halt a year ago.
Yeah.
And we're all still working out how to do it online. I'm actually doing a webinar next week to the South Dublin Libraries, just talking about Grace App. But I feel that everybody needs to do a lot more training before they start if they're a professional, and I think that is missing. And Adam Harris from As I Am often says, if you were sitting on an aeroplane getting ready to go on your holidays and the pilot came over and said, welcome aboard, everyone. We're ready to go to Malaga. By the way, I haven't got a pilot's license, but I have driven a Ford Escort and I know how to park. So I'm going to fly you across the sea to Spain today. How would you feel sitting in your seat? And yet, you meet new parents, newly diagnosed parents who might be getting a home tuition or they might be getting access through the preschools that they set up, the EEC grant or whatever it is. Yeah. And they're so excited that their child has got a place in a class. Yeah. But I just sit back and go, you don't know that this teacher might have... They literally do an hour of one day in 2 years on special ed. Yeah. So they literally arrive in there unable to toilet train, unable to set up communication, unable to do the basic OT that gets someone to be able to sit and attend, and they've got a supervisor looking over their shoulder who's coming in, an inspector saying, now, are you doing the national curriculum? I'm sorry, but this person can't wash their hands after they go to the bathroom. I don't care about the national curriculum. Yeah. And you can see how it puts them off. Yeah, absolutely. And then the ones that do aren't recognised by their union, they aren't recognised by the other staff. It's seen as a DOS. They don't know how hard and challenging and tiring it is to be a special needs teacher and how that commitment is very much a vocation in the truest sense. So that has to change as well, as much as possible. Yeah.
Well, listen, we can add to the list. I mean, it's fantastic. It's been a brilliant chat. I'm very mindful of the time, Lisa. So I think, listen, you have to come on. We'll put a lot of the stuff you mentioned. We'll put them in the show notes on the website and things like that as well. But certainly we'll have to come on and check in regularly about how things are going. And best of luck with the webinar. Okay, and I really appreciate and so grateful for you coming on, Lisa. Thank you so much.
No worries at all. No, it's no problem. It's a pleasure.
Okay.
1, 2, 3, 4. Wow. This is so exciting.
Thank you for taking the time to listen. We hope you took something of value from today's show. To avail of Lisa's free Autism 101 training, go to catscourses.com. That's CATTS courses.com. Select the course and use the promo code Polar Bear Project. No spaces, just Polar Bear Project, all one word. You'll find links in the show notes on the website. And as we mentioned, everyone's journey is unique. However, it is reassuring to know that you're not alone. If you have any ideas or suggestions, please contact us. Drop us a line to hello@polarbearproject.com. You can find us on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube and Twitter. We want to hear your story. The project is currently 100% voluntary and you can donate and subscribe on the website. We're so grateful for all the support to date, and if you want to advertise with us, please get in touch because we'd love to hear from you.